What's better than this? Guys being dudes here on the Draft Dudes podcast, presented by Locked On. It's Joe Marino and Kyle Krabs from the Draft Network, and we are your hosts here on this live episode of the show, joined by our special guest, Jim Nagy, the executive director of the Senior Bowl. Before we get to Jim, Kyle, what's up, dude?
I think this is the first time you've ever done the live intro in front of a guest, so I'm really glad that Jim got to check that box and be the first one to hear the grumbly guys being dudes.
I'm glad I got it out. I tried to pretend he wasn't there. It just you and I
out,
get the rumble out, practice all day. So we're
you did good. Jim, we're glad to have you, man. Thanks for tuning in, and congratulations on another successful campaign this year, and probably the most important Senior Bowl in the history of important Senior Bowls when you consider everything else that's going on these days.
Yeah, guys, good to be on with you. We obviously missed you here in Mobile a couple weeks ago, but it was a rewarding year. It always is, but to get the game behind us now and have pulled it off safely, had all the NFL guys here and the players here. Obviously, the week looked a little different. We had to change a lot of things up, but to get everyone here and get them out safely and administer whatever that was, 3,600 plus tests and only have one positive for the week. It was just, really proud of our staff, how it all came together, and just happy we could, make this thing happen for not just, our buddies in the NFL, but for these players. Such a hard year for anyone involved with football. Is a really difficult year. Just the yo-yoing nature of the seasons and what they had to do to pull it off. So I'm just glad we could make our week happen here in Mobile.
Well, in order for it to happen, obviously there's a lot of work that goes into the scouting process to get the right mix of players there. And so how challenging was it this year with the dynamics of the pandemic and getting to universities and getting live eyes on guys? How much was your process affected just getting the right mix of guys there?
Yeah, it was affected quite a bit because we weren't at nearly as many games. I want to say the 2020 game, we had 118 players on the roster. I think we saw 114 of them live. So that was very different this year, not having live game exposure. So like with anything, you just can work with what you have to work with, and it was mostly tape-based evaluations. We got out to a number of games down here in the Southeast, but not as much around the country. And it did affect it, but really happy with the group we got. We hit the recruiting hard. Social media helps a ton. Our social media numbers have really grown exponentially every year. So really happy with the group of guys we had down here for the game.
Jim, you mentioned the recruiting piece of this was pretty easy this year when you take into consideration some guys didn't play at all. Guys had abbreviated seasons. How much of that recruiting process was a sell on building on what they already had on tape versus this being perhaps the only opportunity that you're going to have to get in front of all 32 teams simultaneously, have a couple days to have some pretty thorough conversations? Because at the time, of you going through and getting these commitments, we really didn't know what the NFL Combine was going to look like. So questions about the rest of the process. So how did you approach those conversations to get guys on board?
The hard part this year was with the opt-out guys. Where there was a couple guys like Walker Little from Stanford, Rashawn Slater from Northwestern, guys that I think they were concerned about the rust factor. And that makes sense, right? They hadn't put pads on. So again, at orientation, when I introduced Matt Rule and Brian Flores to the players, before I introduced those guys, I asked them, I said, raise your hand if you didn't play football this fall. And man, it was a lot of guys with their hands shooting up, and more power to those guys. They weren't afraid. They didn't back down. And again, now once we got through the week, the really interesting thing was a number of those guys that didn't play this fall were ones voted by their peers as players of the week for practice. So, which was really cool to see. But no, we, a little bit of that, a little bit of, hey, we don't know what the rest of the process is going to look like. I think towards when we got to January, we had a really good idea that there wasn't going to be a combine, at least in its normal format with workouts. It's just going to be a medical-based event this year. So we kind of knew that. We kind of laid that out to some of the agents. But, we actually had more guys decline this year than the year before. Last year we had 3. This year we had 4 seniors decline the invite. And the nice thing was, without as many teams playing, we had less attrition in terms of guys that accepted and then couldn't play in the game because of like late season injuries, bowl game injuries, things of that nature. So we didn't lose quite as many once we had them signed up.
Jim, I want to ask you a question that might be a little self-serving, but maybe there's other people that are curious as well. As we evaluate this draft class and try to formalize opinions and assessments on these players, what advice do you have for people that, we don't have the same exposures, we don't have the same data pool that we normally do? We watch players over the summer, so we know where they're at entering their final year in college. But this year's really different, where we put on that lens for summer scouting and you put on a different lens for your final evaluation. But, in between those two things, I didn't have a year of film to study. So, is it a situation where you just have no other choice but to leave guys how you found them? How do you think we should be treating those evaluations? And what do you, from the NFL perspective, how do you think that's impacted things?
It's a really good question. I think that's what a lot of guys in the league are struggling with right now. How much emphasis do we put on a 4-game Pac-12 season?
Yeah.
Those guys were never really able to get in the flow. You look at the ACC. Like we sent a scout to Florida State, I think 3 times this fall, only to have the game canceled on Saturday morning. It was just such a weird year. So you really do have to default a little bit to a more normal year. I think that teams are going to put a little more emphasis on 2019, and then in some cases go back to 18. I do think conferences like the Pac-12, those guys were really adversely affected by it. So again, there's not like a right answer to it, but again, it's like, how much weight do you put on a season where it was so chopped up? And even if you did play a game, you look at Ohio State down the stretch. Like, how do you evaluate Justin Fields, for instance? And he obviously wasn't for the Senior Bowl this year. He wasn't eligible. Like, how do you evaluate those late season games when there were so many backups on the field and he's playing with new people around him? It's a very nuanced evaluation this year, and I think all 32 teams are probably going to go into it a little bit differently.
Joe, I'm glad you took this conversation the way that it did, because Jim, we've had conversations about how we feel or how we would predict or anticipate certain teams may or may not handle the entirety of the process this year and their assets in the draft. And I'm curious from your perspective, you've been in a building, you've had some of these conversations, you attached to several organizations throughout the league. Do you get any sense that there might be teams that are more interested in just kind of deferring these premier picks, trading out of the first round more so than they would be normally, because they want to make those investments when it is a more standard year of evaluation leading in? Do you get a sense we'll get like guys who are or teams that are willing to buy and teams that are more so looking to sell just because of the dynamics of everything at play here?
Yeah, I do think that's going to happen. It'll be really interesting to see how April plays out. I think you're going to have some GMs that are more risk takers by nature, and might be, take advantage of some teams that try to play it more safe. You might see a lot of trades, especially on those first couple of days of the draft. Teams really maneuvering around, trying to get the guys that they feel good about, and that was part of the sell to the players this year. Was this is the only opportunity here in Mobile, was the only opportunity you're going to get to be not only exposed to, guys in the NFL, but the decision makers, right? Like, there were scouts out at games this fall, but there weren't any decision makers. There's only one GM I spoke to around the league that was going to games on Saturday, because you can't do that and then re-enter your team's bubble on Sunday. This particular GM would go to college games on Saturday and then have to quarantine until Tuesday before he could even get back in his team's building. So, like, my pitch to them was like, yeah, scouts saw you all fall, but the guys that are making the picks in April haven't seen you yet. So this is the one chance you have to get in front of those guys for a week-long exposure and the face-to-face interviews. I think we're all used to doing this Zoom thing, but to me personally, I just feel better sitting across from somebody. So that was the selling point for the game. But I do think there's going to be those teams. Let's just focus on the guys we feel good about and the information, whether that's, maybe we have a really good relationship at a handful of schools, and we're just going to lean on those and pick guys from the pool that we really feel good about. And that, I think that's what's going to spark a lot of the trades.
Jim, as we kind of laser in on what actually happened at Senior Bowl week, we know that so much of the emphasis is placed on the practices and the games and how players perform. in those opportunities, but so much of the week is bigger than that, right? It's how they're interacting with coaches and teammates in the meeting room, all those types of things. When I ask you which players really impressed you from, what we couldn't see, who are some of the names that stand out and why?
Gosh, right off the top of my head, I'd say Landon Dickerson from Alabama, the center. I mean, the guy's a total stud. He tore that ACL in the semifinal game. And again, we brought some injured players this year that we normally wouldn't do that with, guys. It's just because of a different year. In a normal year, if they're an injured player, they can go to the combine and connect with these teams and sit face-to-face and meet the teams. They can go to pro day and have a pro day workout, meet with teams at pro day. But because this year being different, we did. We wanted to do the right thing by the players. Landon jumped on his invite. He was one of the first guys that accepted in early November. He was excited about being down here. So we brought him down. And he knocked it out of the park. I told him before he came, I said, Landon, just come and be you. Be the guy that everyone in Tuscaloosa talks about, and you'll be fine. And he came down here. We were watching the tape today of some of the O-line, D-line stuff, and he's off on the side, even in team periods. Like he's grabbing guys like David Moore from Grambling, who'd never played center before this week. And he's giving him pointers between reps. He was essentially like a third offensive line coach with the Panthers staff this week. So he was one. Landon was great. There's too many. There's really too many to name. This year's group of guys they were phenomenal. And I've only been here 3 years, but every year's been great. But this year's class, because of what they went through, you never had to tell them to put a mask on. You never had to tell them to watch their distance. Like they were so into COVID mode that they were so compliant and diligent and disciplined with it. There was really, really a great group of guys. And connecting with them even after the game. I try to follow up with all the guys and make sure they had a positive experience here in Mobile. Just a phenomenal group of guys. So I kind of singled out Landon, but this group as a whole was phenomenal.
I'd like to kind of get your gauge on these two coaching staffs that were here. You mentioned Brian Flores and Matt Rule, and every year when we come down, and we've been coming down for I guess Joe, 6-7 years consecutively before we unfortunately missed this year. But every coach kind of had like their own style of practice. But it felt like this year, both of these teams brought a certain energy level and urgency to the practices as far as getting as many competitive reps as possible. I'm curious if you had that same observation, and if you talk to members of either coaching staff, is that being a big point of emphasis considering everything else going on?
Yeah, I'll say this about both staffs. I mean, they couldn't have been better to work with. Coach Flores and I are good friends from our time in New England together. Chris Greer's a good friend. We got into scouting around the same time. And then on the Panthers side, I've known Matt Rule since he was a GA at UCLA 20 years ago and followed his career. Don't know him quite as well. But Scott Fitterer just got named their GM in Carolina, who's a really good friend from our time in Seattle. And Pat Stewart, another member of the Carolina front office that goes back to my Patriot days as well. So it was like being around friends for the week, which made the communication really easy all the way leading up to the game. When they got named, 2 weeks, 3 weeks prior, really easy, open communication on what we wanted practices to look like, where we'd like to see guys, get some different reps, in terms of position flexibility. So it was really, really good lines of communication. I think what you saw in the practice field in the spirited practices was two coaching staffs that really wanted to be here. Matt Rule had Pat Stewart reach out in October and ask how they got to be a part of the game. And I'm like, well, Pat, tell him that we have no control over that. That's the league office, man. But Brian and I have talked for a couple of years about, coming down here and coaching the game and what they would get out of it. So they were really motivated to be here. They knew that this is in a unique year. They had a really different lens to kind of see these players through, and they took full advantage of it. So, they were both great to work with, and I think they got a lot out of these players.
You mentioned David Moore from Grambling got a chance to play center for the first time, and one of my favorite things about the Senior Bowl is seeing guys in different spots that we didn't watch them play in college. And so when you think about this year's group, are there any other examples of guys that took on a role that they've never really done before, but showed that they are more versatile than maybe what they were given the chance to show during their college years?
Yeah, I mean, 3 centers right off the bat. So David Moore from Grambling, Quinn Miners from Wisconsin Whitewater, and Robert Hainsey from Notre Dame had never snapped in a live game either. and all three of them looked really natural at it. Quinn and David were both named practice players of the week on their offensive lines. Hainsey, to me, now that we've gone through the tape, Hainsey's one of the biggest winners of the week. He was really, really good all week at guard and at center. And then you look at a guy like Demetric Felton from UCLA, who had repped some at wide receiver there. He's kind of the opposite of – he's kind of this year's Antonio Gibson. The sell to Antonio last year was like, man, I think you can make it in the league as a wide receiver, as more of a fourth or fifth receiver, but I really think you got a chance to be a starting running back. So, come down here, do that all week. Let these teams see, kind of what you look like once you get into the flow. Let them see your vision. Let them see your patience and your natural run instincts. And then it was the same way with Demetric this year. He played mostly running back, but just watching him do that and leak out of the backfield and do some stuff, you saw the twitch, you saw the route running potential. And he came down and he was named practice player of the week for their team. And they had Tylan Wallace and Nico Collins. I mean, I think that speaks volumes about all these guys that are willing to try something different. So Demetric going forward out of this week, I mean, he's just going to be an offensive weapon. Don't even label him. Whoever drafts him is going to be able to line him up anywhere now. And it's just like, it's those guys' attitudes and embracing something they've never done. And again, not afraid to fail, not afraid to put themselves out on the line. Teams appreciate that. They really do. So like Richie Grant playing corner during the week, Richie's was my highest graded senior safety in this year's class. It's been one of my favorite players going back to last spring. And then for him to come down here and rep at corner and not even say a word about it and just, embrace it and do a really good job. It speaks volumes to who these guys are as competitors.
I wanted to ask you, Jim, about a player in particular who did a lot of the things that we saw throughout the course of the week, this past week, throughout the course of his career at Ohio State, but really looked dominant for much of the week in doing so in Ohio State linebacker Baron Browning. I'm curious what your opinion is of Baron, his skill set, why he was able to compartmentalize each one of the facets of his game, whether it was pass coverage or blitzing or run defense in the 9-on-7s. How was this week able to showcase the best version of Baron to the degree in which it did, and which is probably really going to help his draft stock when you take into account how good of an athlete he is as well?
Yeah, Baron had a phenomenal week. We really liked the athlete when we watched him over the summer, but you're kind of like, what is he? What is he going to do? And there was, talking to the Ohio State staff over the summer, there was a lot of talk about him just being a designated rusher this year. And that was going to kind of be his primary role. And then once we got it in the flow of the season and you saw him really playing a traditional linebacker role and doing all the different things, he got better every single week this college season. He's a guy that if you watch early to late 2020 tape, there's a clear difference in terms of the game really slowing down, him seeing things quicker. It was obvious. So to get him down here and let him do all those things because he is such a versatile athlete, it really just showcased what he can be. I think that Baron's one of those guys that, and there's a number of guys in the game this year that they're just scratching the surface on what they can become. And that's why he's such an intriguing prospect, because just even over the course of the week here, like every time we put on tape of this guy, he gets better every time he goes out. So, it was just cool to see the staff, that Dolphin staff use him in all those different roles.
Yeah, Jeremy Chin and Kyle Duggar, they captured a lot of buzz coming out of Senior Bowl week last year, and really exciting physical packages in terms of size and athleticism, and really exciting to think about what they can do, as kind of a positionless sub-package defender. And the guy going into this year that I thought had a chance of kind of doing those types of things and gaining that momentum was Hamza Nasruddin out of Florida State, who he had a knee injury at the end of 2019 that took him a while to get back from, and he only played in a couple of games. How do you think his week went, and do you think he can have that same type of valuation where the NFL is going to look at them as maybe a second-round pick that can do those types of things?
Yeah. Hamza had a great week. I said Hamza all fall too, and then he got here, and I called him Hamza, and it's Hamza.
Okay, noted.
And then we had Hamilcar Rashed from Oregon State. So we had two Hams in the game. It made it easy for me. They just called them both Ham. But that's a really good comparison to like Chin and Duggar, in terms of the size profile and the athleticism. Really easy moving guys. So all the coverage stuff, all the one-on-one stuff was perfectly suited for him to show what he can do against tight ends and backs. And then you watch him, and we rewatched the game today, and just like him fitting downhill and playing aggressive downhill against the run. Yeah, you can call him whatever you want. He can be a money linebacker. He can be a strong safety. You could really move this guy around, and he's probably the one guy from this week, this year that really matches up with the two guys you talked about, Chin and Duggar.
Jim, I'm curious that positionless defender has been used as a compliment, but it's also been used as a criticism in some cases. And you think about Isaiah Simmons and him getting drafted as early as he did, and Arizona kind of struggling to get their footing with finding where they wanted to play him. How much of that conversation is had with somebody like Nasser Ladine in the build-up to the Senior Bowl about, you're going to be able to sell yourself in X role or Y role, thinking about like what Hassan Reddick did a couple years back too, ironically, another guy who ended up in Arizona. Is that part of the discussion with these players, is the NFL draft evaluation process and how different teams are going to value it? Because obviously, the NFL draft media is a growing space, and there's a lot of people with a lot of different opinions. And ultimately, the opinions that matter are the ones in the buildings of the teams that are making the picks. So I'm just curious if that discussion is had with some of these prospects like a Nasser Ladine.
Yeah, I think the positionless defender thing is a really interesting concept, and I would never take that as a negative thing. To me, there's tweeners that don't fit. They're kind of tweeners that are non-position fits, and then there's tweeners that can bring a lot to the table. I think the biggest thing when you draft any of these guys, whether it's Simmons or Duggar or Chin, is communicating between the scouting staff and the coaching staff, having a shared vision for the player, right? Like you should be able to get Simmons on the field quickly, if everyone's on the same page on what he is. Carolina is a great example. I mean, Jeremy Chin, I remember talking to a guy on their staff early in the season. He's like, Jim, he's our best DB and our best linebacker right now. But it was like 4 games into the year, but they had a clear plan for him. They got Jeremy on the field. I think what teams have to be careful with is what do you put on his plate right away? And I think that's what New England was dealing with. Like, they love Kyle's skill set, but what can Duggar do now? Like, let's not overfeed him right away. I think Jeremy could just handle it. So I think that's when you have players like Hamza, is like, we know what you can do from a tools perspective, but how quickly can we get that to manifest itself on Sundays? Like, let's not push too much and then have his head spinning and playing slow because he's thinking too much in all these different roles. So I think that's the biggest thing when you draft a player like that, is have a vision for him, figure out what that timetable is going to be, and then execute on it. A lot of times what happens in the draft process is, whether it's the scouts talking in their set of meetings and coaches and just never getting on the same page for the plan for the player. Like, they both sides like the player, but what is he going to be? Like, how are we going to use him? And I've been a part of teams where we just, we really fumbled when it came to those things. So I think Hamza's in a great spot. He showed everything he can do here. And, a smart team will draft him and put him in those situations where he can do what he can do.
Somehow we've went like almost 25 minutes and no quarterback talk has come up. So I'll change that here. I'm really anxious to hear you talk about Mac Jones, the Alabama quarterback, and find out what you learned about him throughout the course of the week and, what type of ceiling you think he has.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start just by talking about Mac, the person. He is, he's a great dude. He's got whatever that, it factor is. Like, he's got it. That's why he's so thought of so highly up in Tuscaloosa. I mean, he connects with people. That's really clear from the minute you meet him. Just has that connectivity, getting him down here with his teammates and around the guys on the other teams. He's just got a really easy way about him. And then, from a football perspective, that was part of the discussion with Mac, is you've probably got 3 juniors right now that, like you just said, there's a lot of people in the space right now. And most people in the space have, Trey Lance and Wilson and Fields ahead of Mac. I said, they can't be here. Mac, you can. Like, you've got a chance to leapfrog one of those dudes or a couple of those dudes. And what really stood out on the field, which you won't see on the tape, is just his ability to take in information and spit it out and handle it. I keep going back to my first year 2 years ago when the Raiders had Daniel Jones. And everyone knows John Gruden's his system and how verbose it is with all the verbiage and everything. And Daniel struggled with that the first day. And I think that, Gruden was really on him, was really pushing his buttons to see how he'd respond. And he got better every day. And we saw it, obviously he ends up being the 6th pick because he got better every day and played great in the game. But Mac handling that stuff and then going to the line and executing, you could just see how quickly he got the ball out of his hands all week. And it really wasn't a buildup. It was Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. The guy's got a really quick brain, and that's processing speed is what the league's looking for. Is he the prototype dual threat guy that, everyone's kind of looking for these last few years? No. But when you process like Mac does and you get the ball out as fast as he does, that's where he kind of stood out from this group. He got the ball out faster than anybody all 3 days. Then he got banged. He rolled his ankle on Thursday's practice, so he couldn't play in the game. But just the processing quickness and the accuracy, both were exactly what, if you're a big believer in Mac Jones, which I am, like those two things are really hard to develop, is that really tight window accuracy and then the processing quickness.
Well, now we've gone almost 30 minutes and we haven't talked about two of the potential first-round prospects that were in attendance, Devonte Smith and Najee Harris, and you had mentioned them with Mac. So I'm curious, Jim, because a lot of their impact this week was the stuff that was behind closed doors. And Joe talked about the interactions with people in the hallways and the coaching staffs. And Najee did some individual drills, but that was about it. So just kind of curious from your perspective, how they made the most of their week here with kind of an a la carte sampling of things on their plate versus the guys who probably had a little bit more to prove in competing throughout the course of 3 days of practice in the game.
Yeah, I mean, we put both those guys with the Dolphin staff. I never liked to split college teammates up on different squads. But guys, this is a draft event now. This is a big piece of the draft process. Why would we put Najee Harris with the Carolina Panthers staff when they already have Christian McCaffrey, right? So it was good getting both those guys with the Dolphin staff. And I think what people have to understand with Najee, that was a legit ankle injury that he had. His agent sent me a picture of his ankle after the national championship game, and it was the size of a grapefruit. Like, I did not think he would get down here and be able to do anything. So, but he did not want to hear anything about not getting on the field. He wanted to do it. He got out there, for 2 days and really put himself through what he could go through. And frankly, the Dolphin staff had to pull him back a little bit. Like, he wanted to do more, and they held him back. But it was great that both those guys could connect with Coach Flores. Obviously, they have Tua down there, so they've got a great resource in terms of background information on both those players. But just Devonte being connected with the wideout crew all week and being in meetings and interviewing, it's just invaluable. And like I said, in a normal year, we might not have brought those guys. We probably wouldn't have brought those guys if they can't get through the whole week healthy. But this just being the weird year that it was, those guys are phenomenal players and they're great people. And we just wanted to make sure they got connected and took full advantage of the one exposure they might have to the teams.
One of my favorite players to watch this year was Kadarius Toney from Florida. And we saw some glimpses earlier in his career of what he can do, but injuries became an issue. But it felt like this year he put it all together, not just the yards after catch, but some vertical receiving ability and obviously the punt return stuff. What was it like watching him in person? Because he seems like he's got those types of movement skills that are really exciting to see with your own eyes.
Yeah, this has been like a 6-year evaluation of Kadarius because he played here at Blount High School in Mobile. So I've gone way back with Kadarius back to his days as a quarterback here in Mobile. And I'll tell you, he can chuck it now. Like, I was hoping they would put in some sort of reverse pass because the guy can throw it about 70 yards.
Wow.
But no, he that was a loaded wideout group at Florida. We'd look at last year's game where, we had Tyreek Cleveland and Van Jefferson and, Swain didn't come to the game, but, Swain did really good things for the Seahawks this year as a rookie. And then you got Grimes this year and Kadarius. So a loaded room. But I go back, 4 years ago when I was still with the Seahawks and you go out to practice in Gainesville, he's by far the most dynamic guy in that football field. So he's always had the talent. Like you said, he just had some hard luck injury stuff. But, the football character is off the charts in terms of, and you can see it in the tape, like competitiveness, toughness. Yeah. He's a unique player. That the route running ability, like some people have questioned route running. I worked with one coach once that thought that a receiver had put too much sauce on his routes. I don't think you can teach the sauce. And you got to let those guys do their thing. And you can teach routes, but you can't teach some of the stuff Kadarius has. And to me, you just let him do his thing. He's going to get open. And then what he did after the catch, I mean, he's a 195-pound guy that runs like he's 215 with the ball in his hands. And, it was great to have him down here. Love having Mobile guys back down in the game. But, yeah, he's one of the most electric players in college football this year. And he'll get on the field for somebody next year. And he's going to transition really quickly because you can't cover him and what he can do with the ball in his hands. That's what everyone in the league's looking for. They want the next Deebo Samuel, the next Brandon Ayuk, a couple guys we've had here in the game. And Kadarius is kind of the next in line.
I have one more, and then Joe, if you have any, I'll let you follow up. But Jim, I wanted to ask you specifically about the defensive line group between both teams this year. Some really, really toolsy players, whether it's Cam Sample from Tulane or Aid Ogundiji from Notre Dame or Janarius Robinson from Florida State. So just kind of curious from your perspective, with so many guys that were like really toolsy, physical, prototype build-esque, and some with some inside-outside capabilities as well, who you thought did themselves the most to help themselves throughout the course of the event this year?
Yeah, it was, the goal is just to bring the best players. I think over the last couple of years, I've tried to bring some guys that fit certain positions. Like we wanted to bring in some noses and, some bigger bodies. But the fact of the matter is, like, those guys aren't getting drafted much anymore. You really got to be spectacular as a 2-down run player to get drafted. So we went more to guys that had 3rd-down value. So that's why you saw a lot of those body types. That's why you saw guys like Cam Sample and Peyton Turner from Houston and Wyatt Hubert from Kansas State. A lot of those guys had to move inside and take some reps during the week at 3 technique. But they really all stood out. I'd say that one guy that I haven't seen a lot about, that when I went through the tape, I couldn't believe how good he was throughout the week, was Chauncey Golston from Iowa. Talk about tools. He's got like 83, 84-inch wingspan, really long, powerful. I think he only came in here at like 200 and just under 270, plays with a lot more power than that. I think he's a guy right now that's probably hotter in the league than draft Twitter or whatever you want to call it. But Chauncey had a phenomenal week. But there's a bunch of those guys. Janarius Robinson had a great game, really kind of put it together in the game. He brought up Cam Sample. He was phenomenal. But there were some guys all week. Boogie Basham had a really good week, lining up over guards and rushing inside. So, a lot of those guys really showed out all week.
So this is, if I'm not mistaken, your 3rd game that you've been the executive director for at the Senior Bowl. So I'm curious, as you look over, I know it's been longer than about 3.5 years or so you've been on this job. What are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned? And, as you think about advancing this event forward in future years, what are some of the things that are going to be, critical and paramount for you?
I'd say when it comes to the players, one of the things I've learned is when it comes to the small school guys is really figuring out how they're wired. We never invite a player that we don't think's a draftable player. Things happen between our game and the draft that obviously bounce some guys out, whether it's something character related we didn't know about. That was the nice thing this year with the Zoom calls. We were on a bunch of those Zoom calls. Schools were really gracious with our staff. But that stuff, medical stuff, slow 40 times at Indy, you can't account for that stuff. But with the small school guys, I saw it the first year. There was a couple of the small school guys that the stage was a little big for them, and they had the talent, but maybe not the self-confidence to come down here and compete. So the last couple of years, I've really tried to do our due diligence, with the coaching staffs and then talking to guys around the league. How do they talk about this guy at the school? Is he going to be wide-eyed? Is he going to, is this going to rattle him, or is he going to come down here ready to compete? And that's why a guy like Ben Barch last year from St. John's, the D3 guy, Quinn Miners this year, those guys came down and they were ready to go. So that was a learning experience the first year. And then, where we want to take this game the next couple of years, grow sponsorships for one, and really make this more of a fan-friendly event. I think doing a lot of research around, calling out a lot of fan blog sites and whatnot, trying to, dig into why aren't we getting more fans down here? And I think what came out of it was people think that the Senior Bowl is a media event and it's an NFL event, and that's it. And you guys have been down here. It's a phenomenal fan experience in terms of, player access. You can, the practices, just being around the NFL, being around 900 NFL guys in town for the week, being around you guys, being able to hit the different bars and, You guys have a podcast set up and stuff. Like, it's really a cool week. So just, trying to further that message about what Senior Bowl week is for fans, and then get more sponsors involved so we can, continue to grow this thing out with, more concerts and different events.
Well, if I may, the first year that Kyle and I went to the Senior Bowl together, we didn't stay for the game. The next year we did, and I would never go again without staying for the game. It's such a great way to end the week, and just as Jim delivers that message, I'd like to echo, like, if you're going to go to Mobile, like, for the Senior Bowl practice, you got to stay for the game, because it's really fun. It's a really fun way to put a ribbon on the week, and I feel like some of my favorite memories from the Senior Bowls that I've been to have been the actual game day.
And I appreciate you saying that, Joe. But wait till you see the new stadium.
I can't wait. I'm so mad I couldn't get down there this year.
Absolute game changer, man. Yeah. It is such a great, Hancock Whitney Stadium is such a great facility. You guys saw it on TV. It looked great on TV. It's great live. The amenities are incredible. We had 16 NFL teams in suites for the week, like they do in Indy for the Combine. So just we really appreciate our history at Ladd Stadium, and it served our event well for over 70 years. But this new facility is state of the art. It's a true game changer.
And Jim, I'll echo your sentiments as well. The NFL Combine, the league's trying to do their best to turn that into a fan event. But for my money, if you were a fan and you wanted to go to one piece of the draft process, I'd pick the Senior Bowl 10 times out of 10, just because there's so much more connectivity with the players, like you mentioned. You can go to Indy and freeze your butt off in February and early March, and you might sit next to somebody who's somebody at the bar at the JW. But you come down to the Senior Bowl and the 2020 event. You had the Great Fan Expo on Friday, and you've already put a lot of great pieces in place. And I see we got a couple comments already. Didn't realize this was a fan event. Somebody's already committed to pulling up next year. So we're happy to spread the gospel of what the Senior Bowl can offer fans for a great week to kind of extend that football season. Everybody knows you can't get enough football, and what you guys have going down is so great down there in Mobile. And we want to thank you for carving some time out of your evening on this Tuesday episode of the podcast, Monday live stream, to join us, Jim, and kind of recap this year's event. Always gracious, always great to talk with you. And we hope you're well. And we're looking forward to getting down there again next year.
Yeah, guys, really appreciate you guys, obviously covering our event and helping promote it. That's great, getting plugs from guys like you. But again, can't wait to get you down here next year. You're gonna love the new stadium, and we're gonna blow this thing out next year. It's gonna be bigger and better than ever. And can't wait to look forward to seeing all your stuff between now and April. It's gonna be fun.
So you guys heard it from the man himself, Jim Nagy. Don't mess around. 2022 Senior Bowl. Let's get on the calendar now. We're going to link up. We're going to have a great time. That is going to do it for us tonight. Kyle Krabs, Joe Marino, and Jim Nagy. Thanks as always for tuning in. We'll talk with you guys again tomorrow.